Hello, and welcome to the latest episode in Brooklyn Law School's ongoing series on law in time of crisis. We are pleased to have a twofer this time around with two guests, both of whom are experts on the law of migration, not only immigration law, but the law governing refugees, asylum seekers, and other people migrating from one sovereign land to another. We have with us Associate Dean Stacy Caplow, longtime director of our clinical programs, and also for today's purposes, importantly, director of the Safe Harbor Clinic, which represents people seeking asylum in the United States. And I'm also joined by my immediate predecessor as interim dean, Maryellen Fullerton, who has written casebooks on both immigration law and on forced migration. So two experts on the law governing migrants and immigrants here to talk to us about immigration law in the world of COVID. Stacy, maybe you could say a few words about how COVID-19 has further affected the situation in immigration law.
So all of the people who were waiting for processing in the southern border, who were part of a program that predated the pandemic, where they would have to wait in Mexico for court dates in the United States, that has completely halted. So people who are living in tents and homeless shelters and are with their families. And it's not about detention so much, it's about just simply languishing at the southern border. In addition, the Trump administration put into place some regulations and what they called treaties or agreements between other countries in the southern hemisphere to, if you pass through Guatemala on your way to Mexico, on your way to the United States, you would no longer be eligible for entry into the United States under asylum rules. So they further constrained and strangled the availability of asylum. But nevertheless, the pandemic has brought all of that to a total halt, and there's simply no processing at all. But that's not the only place that has slowed down. The immigration courts have closed. Most of the USCIS, which is the Citizen Immigration Services, where you do green card processing, where you would do asylum or other kinds of benefits, most of those services have shut down. And so people are, their applications are languishing and nothing is happening to regularize their immigration status. Then abroad, you have closures of immigration processing for people who are entitled to come to the United States because they would ordinarily be immigrants that would, say, a spouse of a US citizen or a child of a US citizen. The consulates abroad are simply not processing those cases. And with the suspension of services, we see slowdowns of naturalizations, which of course in this election year is a very important change, that people want to become naturalized so that they can vote. So everything is slowed down, backed up, or stopped. Plus, there is a crisis of health. The immigration detention system is one of the hotspots for the spread of COVID, just as any other detention facility would be. The immigration detention facilities, which are very poorly serviced and resourced, are places where a lot of people are getting sick, and actually sick people are being deported outside of the country, so that we're helping to spread the infection through those deportations. And finally, there are just crises with respect to employment, health insurance, eligibility for some of the benefits that other people would be eligible for people who are here without documentation. So it becomes harder and harder to survive as an undocumented migrant in this era of the pandemic. The sort of the shutdown of all processing has really had almost invisible effects. The people who are affected by it know what's going on, but the rest of the world is pretty ignorant of that. So another way in which the pandemic has created chaos.
Well, of course, it's creating chaos not only here, but all around the world, the virus being no recognizer or respecter of national borders. It's something that is impacting not only us, but every other country. How are our responses to it different from what other countries are doing? Or, Maryellen, are there ways in which the challenges we face have been distinctive, or the ways in which our reactions have been divergent from what other countries are doing?
The first I wanted to mention is that the United States is the only country thus far to respond to COVID-19 by restricting immigration, not only based on health risk, but based on protecting the labor market. What this means in concrete terms is that through presidential proclamation, lawful authorized visas for people either based on their employment in the United States or based on their family memberships have been halted. And this halting has been justified as a labor market protection that's needed as a consequence of the economic challenges the pandemic has provided. Our response is unique in that regard. Another way in which our response in the United States has been unique among kind of migration lines focuses on the CDC order. So the Center for Disease Control issued an order in late March, essentially prohibiting the introduction of people from countries where contagious disease exists. On the face of that, that makes sense, and it stems from the CDC's authority under public health law to restrict produce, products, people from contagion, to try to stop contagion. But what that order does is, although it says everybody is restricted from contagious countries, so to speak, it then makes exceptions, allowing people to enter unless they're asylum seekers. So the United States has, through this seemingly neutral and health-based order, ended up focusing on and restricting some of the most helpless people, those who are fleeing persecution. The justification being to prevent contagion, but of course, citizens, lawful permanent residents, tourists, workers, all can carry contagion as well as asylum seekers, yet asylum seekers have been the ones picked out by this order.
In a lot of ways, a crisis like this creates new challenges for the law to respond to. But in some ways, maybe it also illuminates some of the existing challenges that were there already, or maybe the ways in which different responses might be available or existing responses are flawed. Stacy, are there any ways in which this crisis has led you or others to rethink how immigration law works or should work?
One thing that I think has happened throughout the entire Trump administration, and also as recently as today, is that we should be very thankful for our court system, which has put stumbling blocks and various types of stays into place for a lot of the worst of the Trump administration proposed changes, including what was a very difficult change that was allowed to proceed, at least in part, mandating that somebody could not be eligible to become a green card holder, or for that matter, to naturalize, if they were going to be or had been a public charge. Now, in the era of COVID, when lots of people are losing their work, this relates to people who are here lawfully and who are on their way to becoming citizens. But it put into effect a barrier if you were to be getting any kind of food stamps or other types of benefits. So fortunately, just today in the Southern District of New York, Judge Daniels put into place a stay on that policy, citing in particular the impact of on the economy and on people's ability to work and support themselves as a result of COVID. The other point I just wanted to make is that I think we, as U.S. citizens, we're all pretty used to very free and flexible travel. We don't have to stand in line at consulates to get visas to be able to go places. Most countries accept U.S. passports, at least for 6 months period or 90-day period, but a fairly extended period that would be what most people would need for travel or tourism. Now, for example, the European Union, because of our mishandling of the COVID crisis, is barring U.S. citizens from entering the European Union. So, that kind of ironic negative effect on what I think American or U.S. exceptionalism, where we were free to travel pretty much around the globe, whereas most countries would, including the United States, require visas for people to be able to enter and have a reason for entering the country. So we all would like to think that in a new administration, a lot of the immigration issues will change. But right now, we're sort of grateful for courts, and hopefully the more than 80,000 people who commented on the proposed regulations will, fingers crossed, have some sort of impact on the worst of them at the very least.
If I could just jump in to add one other view, and this is a little perhaps more optimistic than I should be, but I think one of the things that the COVID-19 crisis has shown to us in New York in particular, but around the United States, is how important immigrants are to our essential services. And I think that's a really good thing. I think it has made more visible people who have been in the shadows. And I'm talking about lawful immigrants as well as people who are here without authorization. And I'm hopeful that that will have some impact on legislation and policy changes going forward.
Immigration law was a busy area even before the pandemic arrived. There was much going on, many crises even before this crisis, whether real or perceived. Maybe you can give us a sense of what was happening in immigration law even before the pandemic hit.
You're exactly right. There have been multiple crises going on, pretty much starting with January 2017, when President Trump was inaugurated, and then promptly proclaimed that there was a travel ban preventing people who otherwise were lawfully entitled to enter the United States from certain countries from coming to and living in the United States. That travel ban, which originally applied to 7 countries, then 6 countries, went through multiple rounds of litigation, has nothing to do with health, rather with allegedly foreign policy and national security, and is now expanded to 13 countries, including Nigeria, the most populous country in Africa. So a lot of people are affected by this ban, and there's been lots of work to try to change it. A couple other crises I'll talk about include, of course, the continuing crisis at the southern border, from the funding of the border wall, which led to a government shutdown of more than 35 days in 2018, to the Trump administration's decision to criminally prosecute every individual who came across the border, allegedly, again, without authorization. This is a change in that generally or frequently unauthorized individuals are sent back home. They're deported from the United States, but they don't leave with criminal penalties, and there aren't criminal trials and detention and jail. In addition, and as one of the really serious consequences of that, as if criminal penalties aren't consequences enough, there was the family separation policy, because parents who were put into pretrial detention were separated from their minor children, which led to those heartrending photographs of young children comforting other young children they didn't even know. More than 2,000 minors were separated from their parents, and they didn't even keep very good records. So it was very hard, and continues to be hard, to try to reunite them. So those are a few things at the southern border. I'll briefly mention a couple of crises going on within the territory of the United States. One is the ending of the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which the Supreme Court just gave a temporary reprieve to last month. But for years now, the Trump administration has said that those 760,000 young people who had been given temporary reprieves from deportation were now on the front lines of being deportable again. And it's not only those people, it's their families, their children, their employers, their schools. So hundreds of thousands, I dare say millions of people affected by that.
Well, many thanks to you both for this conversation about the impact of the health crisis on immigration law. Many thanks to everyone for watching. And stay tuned for our next episode in our series on law in time of crisis.